Hi, Lee Williams with Mike Young, co-host, and Jeff Young. And welcome to a special edition of the GunWriter TV. We're very happy to have you. Kudos on all your hard work. Jeff represented Christian Gunter, who was arrested October 5th for charged with aggravated battery with a handgun. A lot of people saw the video, a lot of people disagreed, a lot of people didn't disagree for whatever reason. All charges have been dropped.
Correct.
Take me up from the fact that from the moment he gets arrested and goes to jail and then gets bonded out, what happened? Tell me about the process.
Well, essentially the way all cases work is after you get arrested, or even if it's a non-arrest case, the case gets sent to the state attorney's office. And they kind of conduct what's called a pre-filing investigation. It's like a secondary investigation.
Who conducted this one?
In this case, I believe it was Earl Varn, who's one of their senior prosecutors over there. He's a felony division chief. He's been there a really long time.
And he's a shooter.
Yes, as far as I know, yeah. He's been around for a long time. He's former law enforcement.
Yep.
He actually used to be my supervisor when I was working over there in the misdemeanor division. So the case gets assigned to a prosecutor, and they do kind of a mini investigation where they'll talk to the witnesses, they'll re-interview the victims, they'll look over all the physical evidence. Lots of times they'll contact the defense attorneys, or what we usually do, and like I did in this case, you contact them, provide them sometimes your client's version of events or maybe any evidence that you have.
And you did that in writing?
That's correct.
You did not make him available for interview?
That's correct. They wanted him to come in and give a statement, but as a defense attorney, we don't usually recommend that. But I myself went and spoke directly with Earl Varn and Craig Schaefer, who's the head guy over there next to Ed Brodsky.
Craig's been on the show, friend of the show.
Correct, yeah, he's been around for a long time as well. And we had kind of a personal face-to-face meeting, and then they asked me to put some things in writing and provide some additional documentations, which I did.
Okay, and then what happened?
Well, and then once they gather all that stuff, the state attorney's office basically makes a decision on what they're going to do with the case. They can either file the charges as is, they can file different charges, sometimes lower charges, or they can just decline the case outright. And in this particular case, after talking with the victims and viewing the video, looking at all the information that I provided to them, they decided that they were going to go with the decline option. So late Friday, they dropped all the charges.
I've read, excuse me, I've read many decline memos. I've never read one like this. This basically throws the alleged victim, Mr. Atlas, right under the bus, calls him out for false statements, numerous false statements.
Right.
Is that your read on that?
Well, yeah, we had maintained, and I had explained to them on numerous occasions, even going all the way back to when I first spoke to the lead detectives in the case, that Mr. Atlas had made several false statements, that his version of events didn't comply with the video evidence in this case. That was part of the face-to-face meeting that I had with them as we pulled the video up. We went over it. We kind of went through some of the discrepancies that I pointed out to them. But we had maintained all along that Mr. Atlas's version of events were not correct, that he was the primary aggressor, and it was clear from the video juxtaposed with his actual statements that he was making a lot of lies or false statements, inconsistencies, whatever you want to say, to the point where his version was just not credible.
Versions.
Well, sure, yeah.
He's also a prolific Facebook poster, I see.
He is.
And some of the versions on Facebook I don't think matched either.
Well, right. I mean, he had pretty much maintained, the biggest issue was he had maintained all along that he arrived at the gas station first, and my client had stalked him or followed him to the gas station, where the video clearly shows that it was actually the reverse, that my client got there long before he did. So that was one of the major inconsistencies in the story.
And in the letter that you gave to Earl, your client told you that not only was he in fear at the scene, but he had Atlas had tried to hit him or tried to swerve into his lane. I mean, he was in fear he was going to get hurt.
Sure, yeah. As you see from the decline memo, they referenced my letter. Our position was, and my client's position is that, yeah, Mr. Atlas was the initial aggressor from the very beginning of this incident. He had tried, basically, he had swerved his car several times on the road, blocking my client. It almost hit him one time. So there was certainly activity that had occurred before the gas station that led up to their incident. I can't get into complete details because a lot of it is obviously attorney-client privilege, so I'm not going to go step by step. But what the memo relates is what I related to them from my client's standpoint.
Where's Christian at now legally?
Where he's at right now is the charges have been dismissed. Technically, there's a statute of limitations on felonies for 6 months after you've been arrested. Not a statute of limitations, a speedy trial. So could they technically reopen the case anytime between now and 6 months after his arrest? They could. I don't anticipate that in this case, but the next legal step would be to, first he's going to try and get his firearms back that were
He still hasn't got his guns yet?
No, there's a process you have to do that because they're in possession of the Sheriff's Department. They have a formal process that you have to go through to get those back. We'll be getting that this week. And then the next step will also be to have his records sealed and expunged so they don't show up on any criminal history for background checks, etc.
Because if he walks into your shop right now and tries to buy a gun,
you'd get a CN probably, or even a no, and you would have to appeal it. I mean, it would end up ultimately coming back approved, I believe, because he wasn't convicted.
Right.
So it would be a pain until it's sealed. Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with this concealed permit. They might issue, lots of times when somebody gets a certain set of crimes, it's in the statute, the Department of Agriculture will send out a letter saying, hey, your license is suspended, waiting disposition of your issue. Now, he hasn't received that letter yet, so technically his license is still active, but I anticipate that we'll have to be providing them some documentation as well to make sure that he can maintain his permit.
You had a question earlier about where he's at.
About how is he? I mean, is it attorney-client privilege to let us know how Christian's doing?
Well, he seems to be doing fine. He was certainly relieved when I gave him the news. Obviously, he was happy and relieved at the situation. He's kind of ready to move on. You know, we've had discussions about what the next step's going to be, whether there's going to be any potential lawsuits or further investigations into the actions of the Sheriff's Department or anything that happened in this particular case. We haven't really delved into those deeply yet, but right now he's still working. Thankfully, his boss understood what happened and he didn't lose his job.
His boss saw the video?
Family. Yes. Yeah, my understanding is everybody saw the video because obviously you were way early on that and got Christian's version out there right away, which helped him out. And you know, he still has his job, he still has his family, he still has his friends, so he's ready to kind of move on.
Speaking of lawsuit, are you going to explore the possibility of suing Atlas and or the Sheriff's Office?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have discussions about that. I mean, it's real early to kind of worry about that. We wanted to obviously play this in stages. The first stage was to get his criminal case over with and try and get it expunged so it doesn't show on his record. And if there's going to be any future activity, whether it be lawsuits or just media stuff or whatever, we haven't really had time to delve into all that yet since all this just kind of broke on Friday.
Now he could, I'm sorry, the Sheriff's Office at the scene, they could have handled this as a non-arrest case, right?
Well, sure.
What would that have entailed?
Well, whenever law enforcement investigates a case, they have two options. They can either arrest you for the crime or they can send it in as a non-arrest. What that means is they gather their evidence at the scene, they let the person go home, they send their case to the state attorney's office. The state attorney's office does that little mini investigation we just talked about, and then if they file the case, they issue a warrant that will arrest the person. And if they don't file the case, then the person's never arrested.
And so there's no bail.
Correct.
There's no loss of time. There's no, I mean, the firearm's still.
Sure, they could have easily taken his firearm at the scene.
Evidence, possible
sent him
evidence.
Home. He's not going to flee. Obviously, he has strong ties to the community. He has no criminal history. He wasn't really a threat. It was clear from looking at the video that there were going to be issues in this case that needed to be looked at and litigated. So whether it was, you know, falls under the stand your ground statute or not or whatever, they still had the discretion at the scene to not arrest him. They could have sent him home, sent him to the state attorney's office. They would have done the same review that they did in this case. He simply wouldn't have been arrested. He wouldn't have had to post bail. He probably obviously still would have hired an attorney, but sure, he wouldn't have spent 2 or 3 nights in jail. He wouldn't have had to post bail. He wouldn't have had to go through all that. He wouldn't have had to get his bike back.
He had a $50,000 bond.
It was a $50,000 bond, yeah.
And he went through a bondsman?
Correct.
So they paid, the family paid the bondsman $5,000. Do they get that money back?
Well, I don't know. That's between them and the bondman. I don't know
I don't think they do.
Generally correct. You have to pay 10% to a bondman.
And that's
generally
their fee.
The rule goes. And then they keep that fee. That's how they make their money. So technically, yeah, whatever he paid the bondsman, he's not going to get back from the bondsman.
Lessons learned from this?
Well, I don't really think there's any. I mean, I don't think Christian did everything he was supposed to do.
No, I'm not saying on Christian's part. What can we as gun owners and armed citizens take away from this?
Well, nothing. This played out essentially. I think he even talked to other attorneys. This is how they all play out. You exercise your right to self-defense. Most of the time, I'm not going to bash specific law enforcement or whatever, but it's clear, I think, that most of the time if somebody is shot, they're going to arrest somebody and they're going to send it to the state attorney's office and let the system sort it out. So my advice would be to do everything that Christian did. Protect yourself, act in self-defense, don't make any statements without a lawyer. Hire a lawyer, a good lawyer, as soon as you get out of jail.
A gun lawyer.
System. Well, hopefully
How
they know
lucky are we
about
to
the
have
rights.
you in our community? I mean, a great lawyer who actually is a gun guy. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of them. I mean, I'm a little biased. I've known you my whole life. But, I mean, we're very lucky to have you and honored to see how this came out. and I know what you did to take care of them, and you worked very hard on the case.
You worked very hard on the case, and your fees were very reasonable.
But I wouldn't do anything differently than what Christian did. It's just, this is just the way the system plays itself out.
Well, there's a disconnect between the way the system plays itself out and what should happen.
Potentially, yeah, and that's something that will be discussion, obviously, going forward with any potential litigation. I know there's legislations; they're always tinkering with the law, adding more protections in there, and we'll kind of see how the legislature does with that.
There's a bill right now before the legislature that would put the burden back on law enforcement to change this. So you don't have to have a stand your ground hearing. So you have to prove that the law enforcement would have to prove at the scene that it's not a stand your ground case. And that would have alleviated the arrest and the $5 grand. Probably still would have retained an attorney.
Right.
Oh, you'd have to.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I'm not going to disparage law enforcement, but good luck with that. You can change that law all you want, but you can ask other defense attorneys, and I know you have. You're still going to go to jail. If somebody gets shot, somebody's going to jail. That's just the way they do it.
One of your colleagues, Charlie Britt, in Manatee,
said the same thing.
You win a gunfight, you're going to go to jail.
Right.
And that's unfortunate.
But you're not going to stay in jail.
Sure. Exactly.
That's
the only other thing I could. The only potential.
The system worked.
Yes.
Right. It played itself out. It did work the way it worked. He's got some negative consequences, but at the end of the day, he's going home. Obviously, he's safe, and that's the most important.
But we're fortunate also that, one, that it went to you, and two, that it went to Earl.
Sure.
You know?
Right. I mean, it's like any other case. If you get the wrong, overzealous, biased prosecutor on there, you could be in for good luck. But the state attorney's office here is real good. So.
Do you see any legal exposure for Atlas in terms of criminality as far as the different versions of the story?
Well, I mean, that's something the state attorney's office would have to look at. Obviously, it appears that he did give sworn statements under oath to law enforcement officers, and if it turns out that those statements, if they can prove that they were lies, then yeah, technically he could subject himself to a perjury charge or maybe an obstruction charge. Potentially, I guess, filing a false police report, although he was technically shot, so it's not really a false police report, but there could be, but that's the state attorney's office job.
Nature of the wound, I heard that it's pretty minor.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding was, I mean, we didn't get that deep, so I didn't get any medical records or anything, but and that
Thank
would
God.
be confidential. But,
Yeah,
but my understanding is he was out of the hospital in a few hours.
And did not require stitches to close.
I don't think so. Again, I don't know. I wasn't the doctor on the case, but
which is good.
Thankfully he's fine.
Yeah,
and you can tell by watching the video that he obviously wasn't. I mean, he was walking around. He drove his car away. He seemed to be waiting for the ambulance. Thankfully, this is one of those situations where, everything worked out. He seems to be okay. Our client's out of jail. His charges are dropped. It was an unfortunate incident. This is something people need to learn when they're driving. Is you got to calm down. You can't get angry on the road because we've seen lots of these cases turn out to be.
Can't be a hothead on the roads because, especially this time of year.
Well, I got to thank you for coming in.
Sure,
you
no
are
problem.
on my speed dial.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, that was what I was going to say. That the only advice I would give is you can ask for an attorney at the scene. So if you have an attorney that you can call on speed dial, just tell detectives, look, I'd like to talk to my attorney first. If you have a good attorney, sometimes they'll even drive to the scene or they can meet everybody at the sheriff's department. Because perhaps if he had given a statement at the scene, maybe they wouldn't have arrested him. I still think they would have. But
I think so too.
He could have made a statement through the attorney like he did with me. It just took a month or so, obviously, because he was arrested. So have somebody on speed dial.
He can always say, I need 5 minutes to talk with my attorney, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions.
They'll give it to him.
Yeah.
I talked to detectives in this case, and I think they had an understanding that it wasn't the best case on the planet, but
I've heard it described in other words that I'm prohibited from using right now.
Still think you just need to be prepared that if you pull your gun and shoot somebody, you're probably going to go to jail. It's just the way that it works.
Unfortunate. Thanks for coming in, and kudos on your fine work.
Oh, no problem.
Good job, man. Good job.
Thank you.
God bless. Long live the Republic, and keep your powder dry.